who don't know what makes them a great team. If you don't know what makes you a great team, how can you operate as one? It does take intentionality to tap into all that God has waiting for you in the gift of your marriage. So today we are talking about leaning into what makes you a uniquely gifted team with your spouse in your marriage. So, Dr. Kim, it seems like God always seems to pair people who are complete opposites. Is it true or is this just a stereotype? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's true. Just because of counseling couples for as long as I have, I've never had two people that came in that were just alike. I mean, they're just different. And sometimes, I was thinking one time talking to a couple, and I said, if you guys were just alike, you'd probably be bored
Hmm.
because you don't grow. We're different by design, all those kind of things. And so, when we get in trouble in marriage is if we're not willing to embrace those differences,
Hmm.
because we are going to have those differences. We are going to think differently. We're going to personalities are going to be a little different. You're going to think, why in the world is he or she doing that or thinking that or acting like that?
Hmm.
And instead of going, you need to change, it's like, okay, what's the value? What does that bring to the marriage?
Hmm.
I've got a couple I just thought of that, he's go, 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 go all the time. And she will go, but she likes a little more relaxed. And so watching them go through just that whole deal of figuring that out. And
Hmm.
no, we can't go all the time. And there is some joy in relaxing and being quiet. And the one who on the other side of that, there is fun in going. And
Hmm.
so you could just something simple like that. You could dig in and just really have a lot of fights about it.
Hmm.
But when you begin, okay, how do we make this work for both of us? How do we learn from each other? How do I uh, benefit from this because of who you are? Then it changes that around
Hmm.
because you're going to be. And it's interesting when I do premarital a lot, or couples tell me they got engaged. It's like we're so much alike, and they are. I think that's what attracted you, but you got to realize there's going to be a lot of things that you're not just alike on, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it is funny how because we've gotten to do a lot of premarital too with since Brian's a pastor. So when you just can
Yeah.
see that they see the shared like perspective or the shared value, the shared end result, but the way they would get there is totally different. Like you're describing, like one wants to
Yes.
be busy and do a ton of stuff, the other one does not. And I mean, it's a real thing because the perspective will quickly shift when you're sharing the same schedule, the same household, all that stuff.
Absolutely. And I think even how you define a great marriage.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define an awesome marriage? And does he define it the same way you do?
Mm-hmm.
Do you define it the same way she does?
Mm-hmm.
All those kind of things that sometimes I think we take a lot of it for granted. And that's pretty normal, I think, when
Mm-hmm.
you're dating, because you're infatuated and you're excited about the wedding and getting married and all that stuff. But it's when all that kind of settles down and you start
Mm-hmm.
doing life together and you're living in the same house, that's when realize, oh, we are different in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. Why did
Yes.
one of our big deal was I used to towel a day, always, my whole life. I just take a shower, drop on the floor, my mom would pick it up, or in the fraternity house, it was just it'd go in a deal. And so Nancy's just looking at me after about 4 days and thinking, "Do you just use your towel one time?" I said, "Yeah." What about you? She said, "Well, I use it more than one
Yeah.
time and stuff." So that was one of, just those little things like that, that we didn't fight over that at all. We
Hmm.
just, in fact, I said, sure, that's fine.
Yeah.
It wasn't a big deal for me, but I guess it could have been. I could have been, well, telling my mom did it, and you need to be like, mom, which would
Right.
be probably the worst thing to say to your newlywed bride
Hmm.
at
Hmm.
all. But yeah, it's just things like that. And learning to embrace those and choosing your battles well,
Hmm.
all those kind of things that we talk about a lot.
Yes. Yeah, that's very true. So what are some of the other common areas? I mean, I don't know. I've never heard anybody else have the same towel compromise you guys have, but I'm sure plenty of people have. But what are some other
Yeah,
areas?
I don't think anybody else is. I've never had, that was just, I guess my mom was very unique in that way.
I just think she was
So,
like the most patient. She must have done so much laundry.
oh my gosh, she was so patient and like that. And that, now if I think if it bothered her, she would have said
Yeah.
something, but that was kind of, and maybe that's what her mom did. I never thought about that, but probably,
Yeah.
that's just normal, something like that.
Yeah.
So I also see couples, I think one of the things that I see all the time is not just taking the time or being willing to listen to each other.
Mm.
I think we don't, and to really listen. There's a difference between just hearing what someone said and really listening to what they're saying. And so
Mhm.
I think that that is something that couples have a lot with, and I think it goes with our culture a lot of just all the
Mhm.
distractions. It also sometimes goes with not valuing the differences
Mhm.
or valuing what your spouse is saying. And so I think one of the most important things that we can work on as a couple is to, if something's important to Nancy, it needs to be important to me.
Mhm.
That may not be on the same level,
Mhm.
but I've got to acknowledge that. I can't just say that's stupid
Right.
or what in the world are you thinking of that for? And so I think when we begin to do that, okay, if it is important to them, I need to make it important to me. And I tell couples all the time in counseling, that may not make sense to you, but it does to her or it
Mhm.
does to him. So I want you to value that and come alongside them in it. So that would be one. I think that another one I see is not being really willing to compromise. I
Mm.
think sometimes we live in a culture that's so me centered, and we've been told that a lot over the last years, that compromise seems to some people as giving in or
Mm.
defeat, as opposed to seeing that as no, that's how you make a relationship work. That's how, you know, big business deals usually happen when somebody's made a
Mhm.
compromise. Marriage happens well when you're willing to compromise. You're not going to get your way all the time,
Mhm.
but it doesn't have to be a win-lose. It can be, okay, let's do it this way and it works for both of you,
Mhm.
or those kind of things. um, Not putting God first. I think that's always, there's just a difference in the couples that I see that finally get that. And
Mhm.
so they're praying together. They're really seeking God in their marriage. When you do that, it makes such a difference. And I think it's just something that is hard to do consistently.
Mhm.
And people get distractions and other things. And so I think you have to be very intentional about that. And then the other thing that I see, and I think it's always been there, I've just seen it a little more, I think, since the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, is really not being as kind or empathetic with each other.
Mm.
I think whatever for some couples, and I'm not sure how much impact the pandemic had on it, but I think it
Mhm.
did. And talking to other counselors, I think they're seeing some things. I talked to a school teacher the other day, and he was retiring, but he was taught high school, and he was just saying how he had seen that in his kids
Mm.
coming back after COVID. So
Mhm.
I think that whole, just not taking the time to look at it from your spouse's point of view, not putting yourself in their shoes, and really the whole word of kindness, being kind to your spouse. You
Mhm.
don't have to say snarky remarks. You don't have to say cutting remarks. You don't have to roll your eyes at them.
Mhm.
You really don't.
You really
I mean, what does
don't.
that accomplish in the
Yeah.
big? What does that accomplish in the big picture? Instead of just being kind
Mhm.
and saying, it's okay. Sometimes Nancy will say it. I'll say, I don't get that, but okay, you do. And so let's go, or
Mhm.
whatever, or help me understand that.
Yeah.
That's a great thing to say to your spouse. Instead of
Mm.
just saying that's stupid, just say, okay, I really don't get that. Help me
Mhm.
understand that. And most of the time, your spouse can be willing to share that with you. And then, but when you do that, you've got to listen. It
Mhm.
goes back to what I said at first. You got to listen to your spouse.
Yeah.
So those would be kind of the things that where I see couples, as I was thinking through that this week, that they really struggle working together as a
Mhm.
team on, and that I think really impact their marriage in a negative way if they don't do that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think I've seen a lot of that too. We've struggled with that in our marriage, is just we assume this is how I think it should be done. So that's how it should be done. And it's just
Yeah.
not that cut and dried. I mean, our approach can be totally different, and that doesn't make it wrong. I mean,
Hmm.
there would be times that, things can be right and wrong, obviously, but a lot of things we're talking about are like, how are we going to get this, budget taken care of? How are we going to get this
Right.
communication? How are we going to get these kids schooled? All these things can feel so right wrong, and they're really usually not right wrong. And so I think that I've seen a lot of that with spouses, with people we've interacted with, and with us, where it's like, I don't really want to listen to you because I just think your way is not as good as mine. And I think that culturally, you're right. There's a big push, and I mean, here where we are in America, it's going to be hard to avoid that because everything here is so independence focused, and it's so like,
Yes.
go do your own thing, and that's just how we were built. But it's not really effective in a marriage partnership at all.
No. No. And selfishness, I think, has always been probably the
Mhm.
number one problem in marriage
Mhm.
forever. Uh, but I think it's just if we live in a culture that's a little more selfish and kind of really honors that in some way,
Mhm.
of taking care, it's okay to do this, then I think that bleeds over into marriage, and that's where marriages struggle
I
for
think
sure.
so. Yeah. I think that's huge. I really do. So, okay, let's talk a little bit more about creative solutions because, like we were saying, most things are not one right way, one wrong way, but we do tend to think about it that way. So, how do we make that perspective shift?
I think I think you always have to think of the marriage as the thing that's got to win.
Mm-hmm.
If Nancy and I are disagreeing on something or different perspective on things, and if I feel, well, she won, or if she feels like I won, your marriage is going to lose, and so one of you loses, the marriage loses, and that's just not a win in any place at all. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think so. Creative solutions would be, as a team, we look at the problem together, we ask God in, we look at solutions together, and we solve the problem together,
Mm-hmm.
and are willing to compromise things we've talked about. So I think you've just got to begin to look at it as your marriage needs to always win. And I
Mm-hmm.
think if you keep that perspective, then the things that you do, okay, we're at odds on this. How do we make our marriage win? As opposed to how we use Nancy. I've done it a lot. Other couples do it. How do I build my case so I win?
Mm-hmm.
Because I really am right and she really is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And seriously, she's got to see it my way.
Mm-hmm.
And so you come up with all these things to do that. We didn't fight over how to load the dishwasher for years, but we both did it different. And I would see her rearranging it a little
Yeah.
when I did. So finally, I don't know. It hadn't been that long ago. In the last 10 years, I said, "Would you rather I just leave my dishes in the sink and let you load the dishwasher?" She goes, "Yes, yes, please do that." I go, "Okay,
Yeah.
I will." So that's it. So we
That's
don't fight
funny.
over that.
That is a
So
creative
it's
solution.
just
Yeah, because that's something that you have to agree on. Everyone can't just start leaving their dishes, but you did agree, and that
no,
works. That's
no.
awesome.
That's right, exactly. And they're not there very long,
Yeah.
but just so it's funny.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually just my breakfast dishes, and then when she gets breakfast, she takes care of them.
The
So
right way,
yeah,
obviously.
and I don't honestly see much difference in the way the dishes look coming out of the dishwasher,
That's
but
funny.
obviously she does. So
Gosh.
that's it.
Yeah,
It's
those
good.
those are truly the things that that can bring so much tension, and they just don't need to.
I know, just and it is. I think it's we don't realize how much impact our family of origin had on us growing up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, uh, and just in so many ways that you're just not aware of the way
Absolutely.
your mom did something, your dad did
Mm-hmm.
something, and that was just your normal.
Mm-hmm.
And if it worked, then you're thinking, well, isn't that the right way to do it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't. Did it always work for your parents too? Really? I can't believe your mom's way worked because my
Right.
mom's way worked.
Yeah,
Now
right.
what do we do?
There can be two ways to do it.
Yes, yes, same thing. All right, and they
That's
got the
funny.
same results. It worked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay. So, that example, like, loading the dishwasher, although I have seen a lot of couples fight over things like that. I have done it. I've reloaded the dishes the right way or what. And so has Brian after I did it. We both have. But so that issue is not really like, it is important in a sense because it can be tense, but also other things. I feel like what we want to get to today is couples finding ways to really work together in ways that can
Mm,
produce some great results that they couldn't achieve alone. Because I do think that's one really unique benefit of marriage, and especially a Christian marriage, is that we have two people who God has uniquely gifted and given a unique strengths and
absolutely.
weaknesses. And so together, we actually have the strengths of two people and can cover the weaknesses
Yes.
and all of that. So I think that's a really beautiful thing that is illustrated in Ecclesiastes with the cord of three strands. It's not easily broken, and they can help one another up. So let's start talking about
Yeah.
kind of learning strengths and weaknesses. How can couples do that, and why should they?
I think it is. I just think God, it's just so interesting. And I don't think I've ever counseled a couple where I haven't seen this, that one has a strength in one area where the spouse has a
Mm-hmm.
weakness, and where the other spouse has a weakness, the other has a strength.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, and I think sometimes we don't see that, embrace it. But I think God really created us that way
Mm-hmm.
so we could learn to rely on each other, and so that those strengths and weaknesses could complement each other, and then we learn and grow together. It's kind of iron sharpens iron deal.
Mm-hmm.
And like you just said with Ecclesiastes 4:12, it's that cord of three strands, that we're stronger together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the way we do that is learning, asking God to help us recognize the strengths
Mhm.
in our spouse and in ourselves, and also to recognize the weaknesses. And as you do that, and maybe just talk about it. So, what strengths do you feel like you have? And then I think you may be able to say, I'm not really good in that. I'm so glad you are.
Mhm.
And so you begin, and y'all can do the same thing with the areas that you feel you're weak in. And I think as you do that, you're going to see that we complement each other pretty well.
Mhm.
And God really didn't make a mistake when He put us together.
Mhm.
But, God puts us together, but He also wants us to work at it too.
Mhm.
I mean, He could just zap us and have all these things. Okay, I love your differences. I
Mhm.
love your strengths.
Mhm.
I love your weaknesses, all that kind of stuff. But I think there's so much value in learning to find those and to value those and to see how those work together.
Mhm.
And so I think a good example too is that couples get to, probably if they haven't had a issue before, when they have kids,
Mhm.
how do we parent?
Mhm.
Most of us didn't come from homes where we're parented, exactly alike.
Mhm.
Now, if one has had a bad experiences growing up, some bad things happen, then they're going to probably lean more toward, okay, how did your parents do it?
Mhm.
Oh, that sounds a lot better than my parents did. But if you both grow up in homes that were pretty good growing up, you're going to think, well, we really need to do it this way,
Mhm.
instead of saying, how do we do it with our kids?
Mhm.
And then realizing, you and I've talked about this before, I think, on the podcast, how each child is so different.
Mhm.
So it's not like you have parenting plan A and you put it over all your
Right.
kids.
Yeah, no.
You have your goals that you have for each child and
Mhm.
things you want them to do, but how you get there can be very different depending on the child.
Mhm.
And so I think that's an area where you can really look at your strengths and weaknesses. Okay, you had so much influence on this child because you guys related well. You really were able to do that. I'm at a loss with this child.
Mhm.
And they say, well, I think your strengths here would really make a difference at this child.
Mhm.
And so you begin to work together. And I think that's one of those things. And if you learn to do that together in the early years of your kids, then when you get to some of the more critical years, probably the teenage years, you're on the same page and you're able to show the kids you're on the same page. And that's
Mhm.
huge. And that's a really good example of seeing your strengths and weaknesses really work together.
Mhm. That's really good. Yeah, it reminds me of one thing that we did when our kids were first born, like when we first had our first child, was we were just at a loss to deal with this like no sleep thing. We couldn't figure it out. But we we realized that the time of night when I would sleep like a rock and I wouldn't even wake up is when Brian would be more of a light sleeper and he would get up. So we kind of would trade off. It was like if it's from bedtime to maybe 3, I would wake up just kind of naturally and hear her cry and go get her. And then if it's after like 3 or 4, it's his turn. And then he'd get up with her in the morning. And so we kind of shifted off in that because naturally that was our, like physically, we had deep sleep at different times. So when we
Yeah.
figured out, like, oh, we can tag team this and we get better sleep that way, we both do. And it's kind of working with how God already made us. And it's interesting because before that, that was a real pain point when we got married, that we had different sort of, you know, energy. I was more of a night owl, he was more of a morning person. And so it was always tough for us to figure out like going to bed and getting up. But then it
Yeah.
became a real help with having babies.
That's so good. Yeah, and that's a great way of figuring that out and
Mhm.
making it good for everybody
Mhm.
in that situation. And both of you were sacrificing a little
Mhm.
bit, and so it really worked.
It really did work for us.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, of course, then when you get four,
They
it was a little different.
eventually sleep more, so that was really the
Yeah,
saving
that's
grace.
true.
Yeah, it's so funny. Those middle of the night times when you're like, "Did that happen? Did I dream that? What's happening?"
I know exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
we kind of did the same. I would if, do the middle of the night feeding
Mhm.
because I just loved it for some reason.
Mhm.
Because they're usually not completely awake and they're just hungry
Mhm.
and all that kind of stuff. And I loved that, the 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning
Mhm.
like that. It was just a special time. And so I think that gave Nancy, and then I feed, it was either Grant or Jillian, put them back to bed
Mhm.
and then go back to bed. And I could always go back to sleep really easy, really quick. And Nancy can't. Once
Mhm.
she's up, it's hard for her
Mhm.
to get back to sleep. So that's a good example that you gave. And I can see how, that helped us too.
Mhm.
I didn't mind getting up in the middle of the night to feed. And
Mhm.
she, not that she did, but I mean, she'd been doing all this other stuff. It's about time I fed them,
Right.
you
It's your turn.
know.
Well, and it's cool too because
My
I
turn.
do feel like there's a lot of like in those kind of decisions, how will we handle this? There's a lot of opinion or a lot of ideals that you might think you would try this or that, but really it's just kind of what works between the two of you, and
Absolutely.
that's what's the best way to go.
Yeah, and you can certainly you're going to get advice from people. People are just so generous in
Right.
sharing that
Yeah.
sometimes,
Yes.
whether it's helpful or
They
not.
are.
But you still got to figure out what works for you.
Mhm.
And if it works for you, don't let anybody criticize you for that.
Mhm.
Hey, this works for us. It works for our marriage. Probably wouldn't work for yours, but it works for
Yeah,
ours.
that's great.
And that's what you're trying to figure out. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so practically what are some ways that couples can support one another in their weaknesses?
I think you've got to accept them for
Mhm.
sure. To accept that I have weaknesses and that your spouse has weaknesses. You both do, and then to see, okay, how is God gonna use these differences? And you
Mhm.
can pray for that. God, help us to understand these differences. Help us to understand our weaknesses and our
Mhm.
strengths, and help us understand how we work on those together. And I think you begin to see some things in a different light. We
Mhm.
have a tendency to criticize our weaknesses within ourselves, for
Mhm.
sure. Sometimes we want to hide our weaknesses or not admit them. And on the other hand, we're pretty quick sometimes to point them out in our
That's
spouse,
true.
what we see in them. And
That's
so if you
unfortunate.
get in this game, if you get in that game, that's not going to go. And so it's learning to value those weaknesses too.
Mhm.
And that there's nothing wrong with that we all have weaknesses and we all have strengths. And when we do acknowledge our weakness and we do see a value or accept that in each other, then we're able to say, okay, God, how do we make this work better? How do I complement that weakness he has
Mhm.
or she has?
Mhm.
And how do we grow in that? And so I think really the main thing with weaknesses is to accept them
Mhm.
and not to criticize each other for them or to put each other down for them. Just the reality of that we've all got weaknesses, no matter who we are.
Mhm. I think that's really good. And I think too there's a lot of like you said accepting. I feel like for me it's like I know my weaknesses, but if Brian says them, I'm like, "Oh, no, no." Like I don't want to hear them said by you. But if I already know
Right.
that he isn't pointing it out like to make me feel bad or to use it against me, it's just kind of like, well, we both know. And if he accepts it, then I feel a lot more peace in that because it's not that you can't grow. You can grow in your weaknesses, but it's going to be really hard to do that when it's a real tension point and you know that it's driving you
Hmm.
apart. Like if you're not feeling accepted or loved in spite of it, it's kind of hard to acknowledge it in an appropriate way that allows for growth too.
Absolutely, and I think too you can use different words. I was just thinking you can kind of say, this seems to be hard for you, and it really isn't hard for me.
Mhm.
Why don't I do
Mhm.
this? Something like that, where
Yeah.
we're just acknowledging that,
Mhm.
um, and again, I think if you've sat down together and you've kind of talked about strengths and weaknesses, and you say we're going to really work on helping each other with these, coming together, working as a team, all
Mhm.
those kind of things, then when you bring those up, they're not going to be as offensive
Mhm.
because it's like you've both agreed to work on this together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like a gotcha. It's like, "Hey, we're helping one
No,
another."
and it can be like I got you, and
Mhm.
that's where you really get in trouble.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. I mean, we've probably all done it at some point. It's not helpful.
Oh
Not
yeah,
helpful.
it feels good for about a second
Yeah.
or half a
Yeah.
second, and then you think, "Crud,
Yeah.
what did I do?" And now I've got all this stuff I've got to unravel,
Yes. Yeah.
because of just that cute little thing you did for a
You're
minute that
right. Right.
really wasn't that cute, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
you
I
know.
do think it's interesting too how like when we're able to accept each other and support them, then we can work through some of them. And like one way we've done this is with just having different like I'm more of an introvert, Brian's more of an extrovert. And so, we it's not necessarily a weakness or strength, but it's just kind of our personality style. And so by accepting that difference, we can work together to make social plans that work for both of us. And so, maybe we agree on this amount of social time and then this time at home, or maybe we do different things sometimes. But it's with that in mind that we're not trying to change each other. We're just accepting we're a little different. So we're going to work on it together for a good result for both of us.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. So, how does that work for you guys with the role of a pastor and his wife?
I have to be really intentional about being ready for Sunday or for social gatherings because
Uh-huh.
I just have to, sometimes I just have to take other things off my plate so that I have the social energy for it. I've had to
Yeah, you
learn,
have to,
yeah, the hard way.
where Brian just walks to the stage or walks into a room and he's fine. He doesn't have to prepare at all, right?
Well, well, he
Or,
prepares in different, I mean, obviously prepares for Sunday, but yeah, it's
for
just
Sunday.
socially. I mean, when we go out, if we go out on a date or if we go on a walk or the beach or something, he can just know every single person. And I'm kind of like, okay. I'm like trying to keep up here, put on my big smile, be ready to go. It's so
uh,
funny.
yeah, because I just thought of that when you were saying that,
Hmm.
because you are a pastor's wife, and
Hmm.
so there people have certain expectations, I'm sure,
Yes.
and people want you to be visible
Hmm.
and things like that.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
been really hard for me. And I wrote an article about it that we have on austinmarriage.com's blog because it's been
yeah,
such a hard thing, but just learning how to navigate it in a way that is not soul sucking, a way that like allows
right.
me to thrive even in this role that seems like a weird fit for an introvert.
Yeah, yeah, that's good.
Hmm. Yeah, so we talked about covering weaknesses and kind of growing through those, but how can couples also best play to their strengths?
So I think playing for strengths, I think again, it's to embrace those and not get competitive with them, and
Mm.
to value those
Mhm.
strengths. I think don't get jealous of your spouse's strengths.
Mhm.
Be thankful for those, embrace those strengths, and see how. Oh my gosh, just like you're saying, I don't have to walk into that church. I don't have to get on that stage every week. I
Mhm.
don't have to walk into that social gathering and be the pastor. And he's got those strengths. And I don't have to do that. I have to be there and I have to stretch myself a little bit.
Mhm.
But I love it that he's got that I don't have to do that role,
Mhm.
because that would be really hard
Yeah.
for me to do, or if not impossible. And so learning to embrace those strengths and see the value in them. And maybe that is looking at a weakness that you have, or at something that you're just not quite as good at as your spouse is in that area. So I think that would be it more, is to really embrace those and value them, and in yourself and in the other person. And don't ever use your strengths as a weapon over your spouse
Mm.
either. Don't use that as something, oh, I'm better than you,
Oh yeah.
or I can do this, you can't, or yeah, or do it that way. Well, you're so bad at that, or
Mm.
you're so weak at that, so I'm taking over because I'm strong in that. I mean, no, that's not what you want. You want
Mhm.
to say, hey, let's let me do this, and I think that'll give you a break here, or whatever it is. That'll help out, and see that as using your strength to help your spouse, to come alongside your spouse, um, in a very positive way.
Mhm. That's really good. Yeah, and I think at this point I can't believe I haven't thought to mention this yet, but we do have a guide, a resource that we've created at Awesome Marriage called Team Me and You, or Team You and Me. Um, but it's all about this
Yes,
process of learning how to understand your strengths, understand your weaknesses, call out the strengths in your spouse, how to work together. And it goes through a lot of practical stuff about how to identify all those, how to see each other as a team, really like how to view that. And it's kind of cool because like you're saying, Dr. Kim, there's not competition in a team. I mean, a team, well,
right,
not a healthy one, not a great one.
right.
You're pulling each other along. You're pushing each other forward. You're realizing that nobody can be a team alone. You have to learn how to work with your teammate and how to encourage them and call out the best in them. And so I think that's a huge piece of this, like you said, is not holding their weakness over them or lording your strength over them, but is just saying we're different and that's great because we you can't have a team with every player playing the same position.
No, absolutely. It's kind of like what Paul was talking about, the different gifts
Mhm.
that people have,
Mhm.
spiritual gifts, and none of us have all those spiritual
Mhm.
gifts except Jesus,
Mhm.
and so you look at a church, and yes, you've got someone like Brian who can give the word, and
Mhm.
then you've got someone that's hospitality, and you've
Mhm.
got someone that has these different gifts. And that doesn't mean because the person with hospitality can't preach that's negative.
Right.
No, the person that's preaching can't do the hospitality. They
Mhm.
need you there to do that. So I think if you look at it, it helps you see that that God created us different there, and we're going to have strengths and
Mhm.
weaknesses. And in a marriage, there's just two people, so your strengths and weaknesses that God works at are going to complement each other.
Mhm.
In a church, you've got a number of people
Mhm.
that are going to have some of the different gifts, but they all work together. And that, I think that's Paul's point.
Mhm.
Everyone is valuable. Every strength is valuable. Every weakness is valuable because you understand that someone else is going to have the strength to fill that.
Yeah. Yeah, ideally. That's such a beautiful picture because I think when I'm thinking about it, really the worst things I've seen with churches going wrong is when it's one person's like, I've got all the strength. I've got this covered. I have everything. And then they just kind of force it. And that's
Yes.
not at all the model of how relationships are designed to work. Like you said, the different giftings all work together. And that's good. So it's really good to be able to lean on someone who has the strengths we don't have and to support each other in that.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking, and you guys, I'm sure, probably went through this when the church was little. I was just thinking of a pastor I ran into one night before Easter, and I can't remember why I ran into Kinko's, but it was late, like before they closed at 10, but it was late. And here's this pastor running off his Easter bulletins on the printer.
Mm,
And I just think that as a pastor, as you do a church plant, when you find a volunteer or able to hire a staff member that has a strength that
yes.
you don't have, that you've had to play out your weakness, what a joy that's got to be.
Mm-hmm.
And probably the same thing for somebody doing a startup business.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing this, but God, like having to do all of this, and then you're able to find someone that has a strength in that area you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we see that value all over the place. Well, the same thing is true in marriage.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Same thing is true in marriage.
No,
Yeah.
that's so true because I think of those times when we would like, oh, we found the staff person and they are incredible at the things that we're not good at. But it's really hard
Yeah.
sometimes, like it is in marriage, to communicate because we fundamentally see things differently. So there's this, it
Yes.
just takes a little more work to figure out how to play to those strengths.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah.
good.
And I think as guys, we've just got to, it's okay to admit we have weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sometimes gets in the way
Mm-hmm.
of, and we try to do things that we just deep down, we know we're really, this is not my strong suit,
Mm-hmm.
but our ego and pride gets in the way. And so I think for us as guys, and some women probably have that issue too. I'm not putting it all on guys,
Mm-hmm.
but it seems like I see it more in guys, to really, it's okay to have a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on how, some guys were brought up, you can't be weak. You
Mm-hmm.
can't cry. You can't do this. You can't do that. I don't think cry is a weakness anyway. I think anything Jesus did, I'm okay with.
Yeah.
And for me doing it, and he wept. And
Mm-hmm.
so I can weep
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like
absolutely.
that.
That's good. And that's good. I mean, if we could admit those, that's going to bring a whole nother level of like closeness and intimacy in your marriage that you can't have when
Oh
you're
yeah,
just, you know, closed off.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
That's good. So, what are some of the ways that you and Nancy have personally been able to grow in working as a team in your marriage?
I think it's been a really process
Hmm.
because one, I think the fact that we not only differences, but the thing we had in common, we were both really strong type A personalities. And so we could dig in our heels. We could, all that stuff of learning to compromise or admitting that somebody might have a better idea than you do and those kind of things. It really was a process. And I honestly think if prayer had not been a part of our marriage from the beginning, we probably still would be fighting a lot of
Hmm.
those demons, honestly. Being able, because I think through prayer, God helped us to learn to value that and to also help us learn that what we were doing wasn't working.
Hmm.
You just can't fight that. And then I think out of that, learning to really listen to each other, not discounting each other, asking each other, how can I help you? That probably, that phrase there was probably one of the key phrases
Hmm.
that we to each other. How can I help you? Not saying you're so weak in that. How can I help you?
Hmm.
It's just, how can I come alongside you? How can I help
Hmm.
you? So I think what we've learned, I think we learned it with kids, with as they grew up, and because we did have some different ideas, different family backgrounds, but we would pray,
Hmm.
and it was so cool how God would just always show up, and it
Hmm.
was like things that we might have been discussing, not really arguing about, but trying to figure out for 30 minutes, and one of us would say, "We haven't prayed about this," so we pray, and about 2 minutes
Hmm.
later, we're in agreement. So I think just being willing, working as a team, to realize there's three of you in that team,
Hmm.
and and when you involve God in it, it's going to make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so much of the time where we get in trouble is we leave God out.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes selfish. Then it comes my way or your way. And when God's in the middle of it, then it's that's going to be a win for your marriage. That's how you work as a team,
Mm-hmm.
and God's there with you to guide you. So I think that's where the things that we have learned really of overcoming our personality strengths of being type A
Mm-hmm.
and just learning to involve God, to listen better to each other and to value each other.
Mm. That's so good. That's really good. And you guys are such a testament to the fact that you've persevered through that, and then you've come out the other side stronger and having a great time.
Yeah. 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 And it just, it like, I don't know why. Sometimes I think we all dig in and we think, well, our way really is the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, because we've talked before, and then to come from a fairly dysfunctional home. So even she thought my parents' ways were better.
Mm-hmm.
But she could say, you kind of alluded this earlier in a different situation, but she could say something bad about her parents, but I learned I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really important for me to learn that
Mm-hmm.
because, I think one time I said, we wouldn't have these problems if you'd been raised different,
Oh,
which was
ouch.
really not good to say.
Mm-hmm.
That was early on, and I learned there. And I could, I guess she probably got angry, but I also, before that, I saw the hurt that was. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, that's just someplace you just can't go.
Yeah.
And so you do learn about those things
Mm-hmm.
as you grow up, and um, what how you're going to do your marriage, how you're
Mm-hmm.
going to make it work for the two of you.
Mm-hmm.
And it can't be just one person's way.
Yeah. Yeah, there's two people in there for a reason. And it's funny because it's like that's the hard part, is that it's all, collaborative, but that's also the beauty of it. So it's just interesting to me that pretty much anytime you find a real pain point or a tension, the flip side of that is going to be probably the most strength you could find in your marriage.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's pretty cool when you're able to, when you work as a team, and you do things and you solve problems
Mhm.
and you get through hard times together, and
Mhm.
you look back and you think, oh my gosh, if you hadn't been with me, that would have been so much harder.
Mhm.
And so learning to value that and look at that perspective, of how valuable your spouse really is to you,
Mm.
this gift that God's given you. And it wasn't a mistake
Mhm.
that you guys are together.
Mhm.
And when you made your vows and that covenant with God the day you got married, and he was all in.
Mhm.
And so if he's all in and you're all in, you're going to make it through all those things.
Yeah. Oh,
He
that's
didn't
good.
promise it's going to be perfect. Like I think John says, or in John, it's Jesus said, in this life you will have
Mhm.
trouble, but don't worry, I've overcome the world. And he's telling us, that's not going to be a perfect road.
Mhm.
But it's going to be different because I'm with you.
Mhm.
And if you involve me in that, and that's what, for us, that's made all the difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good.
Yeah.
So, as we close out this conversation, this has been a really helpful topic and really hopeful as well. Do you have any final piece of advice today?
Well, I hope this was helpful for sure, as I do all of the podcasts that we do. But I think maybe it just takes some time together, or maybe you sit down to yourself and then bring it to your spouse and think about the differences you have, your strengths and weakness, and how, ask God, pray to see how He would have you, live those out
Mm-hmm.
in your marriage, and then just kind of share those things with each other, and make a commitment to, we're going to work hard to be a team.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to work hard to put our marriage first, God first, and let Him, and put our marriage above our uh hello. Oh, and and we let God work ahead of our selfish desires,
Mm-hmm.
and that will make a difference. And so I hope it gives you hope. I hope if you're not being a team now, that you can be a team,
Mm-hmm.
and just take step one today.
That's so good. That's so good. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And I want to remind you that we have that team, you and me workbook for you as well, that we really took time to create just for this conversation, for this situation, because we hear it so often from couples that, these
Hmm.
differences are a pain point, but like we're saying in this episode today, they can also be where you find a lot of fruit. And so this guide, I think, is just super practical and really breaks the process down. So it's approachable and manageable, and I think really productive for you. So make sure you find that in today's show notes. We'll have the link to that, of course, and we'll also have the link to order Dr. Kim and Nancy's book, Love, Intimacy, and Sex, in the second half. Wherever your marriage is today, we hope that you're going to be thriving in the second half. And this book will equip and encourage you to do just that. So both of those links are in today's show notes. If you already subscribed to the podcast email, you'll get those delivered straight to your inbox, of course. And if there's anything else you need from us, feel free to always reach out and email us at info@awesomemarriage.com. We answer every email and we love to hear from you. Thanks for sharing your time with us today. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.